"We don't serve people like you," the harbor manager snapped, his voice loud enough to silence the dock. Walter Briggs 77 didn't argue. He simply pulled out a faded military ID edges, worn photo. Faded but the rank still clear. Command Master Chief. No one stepped in. No one cared. His wooden boat wasn't glossy enough for the new Marina, so they pushed him out. 2 days later, 6 Navy ships appeared on the horizon. No announcements, no ceremony, just steel and silence. A rear admiral stepped onto the dock and faced the stunned crowd. "I'm looking for Walter Briggs," he said, "because sometimes when a nation forgets its heroes, the Navy shows up to remind them." Bayfield shores used to smell like salt and fish and motor oil. In the early mornings, you could hear the rattling of crab traps, the hum of outboard motors, and the laughter of dock hands swapping stories over black coffee. That's the town Walter Briggs fell in love with, long before the sleek yachts, fusion restaurants, and rooftop condos arrived. Walter, now 77, lives in a modest one-bedroom cottage just beyond the curve of the coastline. It's a weathered little home, whitewashed siding, a screen door that creaks, and a porch that looks out over the inlet. Locals call it the last real house in Bayfield. Every morning at first light, without fail, Walter makes his way down to the dock, where his wooden boat waits the horizon bell. The horizon bell isn't much to look at, especially compared to the fiberglass speedboats and polished cruisers that line the new Marina. But every inch of it was built by Walter's hands. Mahogany ribs, pine decking, navy blue trim, and an American flag that he replaces himself every 6 months, no matter the weather. That boat is more than a vessel, it's a memory keeper, a relic of craftsmanship and quiet pride. Walter wasn't always a quiet old man in a ball cap. Once he was Command Master Chief Briggs, U.S. Navy, leading coastal rescue units through hurricanes evacuations and narcotics interceptions. In the 1980s, his team pulled stranded civilians off the roofs of flooded towns. In the early 90s, they intercepted drug boats off the Gulf that carried enough product to poison entire cities. He never bragged about it, never needed to. The rows of commendations tucked in his footlocker say enough. But for Walter, legacy wasn't about medals, it was about what you pass on. So when he retired to Bayfield shores, he started something simple but beautiful. Every Wednesday and sometimes Saturdays, he took kids out on the horizon bell. Not the ones who could afford private sailing lessons or jet ski tours, the others. The quiet kids. The ones with single moms and secondhand backpacks. The ones whose schools didn't have art programs, let alone field trips. He taught them to tie knots, read tide charts, respect the wind. He let them raise the flag each morning, one hand on their chest, one on the halyard, as he stood quietly by. He told stories not of war but of wonder, about whales that swam near the coast in the spring, about a time the sea froze over in '89, about listening to water the way you'd listen to a heartbeat. Some kids came back every summer. Others wrote him letters from college. A few, now grown, bring their own children aboard. None of them ever paid a cent. But Bayfield shores changed, slowly, quietly. What used to be bait shops became juice bars. The old diner where Walter used to get breakfast closed and reopened as a wine cafe with valet service. The working marinas were bought up by development firms from out of state, rebranded into harbor lifestyle communities. They installed gates, security, and aesthetic codes. Walter never changed. His boat didn't get a paint job. His shirt still had salt stains. His work boots were stitched instead of glued. And so week by week, the dockmaster moved his slip farther down the pier. Tourists rolled their eyes at the sight of his boat. Influencers asked him to move for pictures. They said he didn't fit the brand. But Walter never wavered. He showed up. He taught. He waved his flag. Because to him, a town wasn't about its buildings, it was about the people it remembered. And Bayfield was starting to forget. It began quietly, not with a confrontation, but a shift in atmosphere, like a storm that hadn't yet broken the sky, but had already darkened the light. Walter Briggs first noticed the change when his regular dock slip, Slip 12, had a new nameplate bolted in, reserved for platinum members only. No call, no warning, no courtesy. When he asked the young clerk behind the new Marina desk about it, she smiled like he was asking about a parking ticket. "Oh, we've updated our layout. You've been reassigned to Dock 6, near the fuel station." That dock was far from the tourists, out of view of the new cafe, where the tide sometimes left algae on the concrete, where no one wanted to moor. But Walter didn't complain. He simply nodded, adjusted the rope on his shoulder, and guided the Horizon Bell down the pier like he'd done every week for 15 years. The new harbor manager arrived 3 months later, Chad Ellison, tan confident and always in a Marina-branded polo. The kind of man who never seemed to break a sweat and spoke like everything was a branding opportunity. Chad didn't recognize Walter when he first saw him, but he noticed the boat. "That yours?" he asked, one eyebrow raised. "Built her myself," Walter replied. 22 years ago." Chad didn't reply. He just gave a tight smile, tapped something on his tablet, and walked away. From then on, things escalated. One week, the power station at Walter's dock mysteriously stopped working. No apology, no repair. The next a notice was taped to the windshield of his boat. "This vessel does not meet visual compliance standards. Please contact harbor management." Walter brought the note to the office. The receptionist didn't even look up. It wasn't just him. Other old-timers were being pushed out too. The crabber with the rust-stained deck. The quiet woman with a catamaran who taught kids how to snorkel. Little by little, the soul of Bayfield was being replaced with noise-canceling headphones and Instagram filters. But it all came to a head one Wednesday morning. Walter had 8 students scheduled for a fishing trip, 5th graders, from a Title I school in the neighboring town. Some of them had never seen the ocean, let alone ridden a boat. Their teacher, Ms. Lila Jennings, was already in the parking lot with the kids holding packed lunches and water bottles. Walter arrived early as always. He wore his cleanest denim shirt and brought extra life vests. He docked the Horizon Bell in what he thought was still his assigned spot, and that's when he heard it. "You can't dock here." Walter looked up. Chad Ellison was walking briskly down the pier, tablet in hand, sunglasses perched atop his immaculately styled hair. "This isn't your slip anymore," Chad continued, not even glancing at Walter. "We've updated aesthetics. Your boat violates our revised guidelines." Walter stood slowly. "I've had a berth agreement here since 2009. I've been teaching on this dock every week for over a decade." "That was before the rebrand," Chad said, tapping his screen. "We're a premium destination now. We serve a certain clientele. This boat, it's not part of the image we're curating." A few tourists nearby turned to watch. Some took out their phones. Others looked away awkwardly. Walter reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document, his Coast Guard license, his veteran's ID, and a letter from the school confirming his volunteer role. Chad barely glanced at them. "I don't care who you used to be," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "This marina has standards, and you, sir, don't meet them." Then came the line that would echo across the internet days later. "We don't serve people like you." A hush fell over the dock. The teacher and children had just arrived, watching from a few yards away, unsure of what was happening. The smile that had lit up one boy's face faded like a tide going out. Walter's fingers tightened around the papers in his hand, but he didn't shout. He didn't argue. He just gave a small nod, turned, and began untying the Horizon Bell. He waved gently at the children, an apology without words. Then he guided the boat away from the only harbor he'd ever called home. Walter Briggs didn't know he was being recorded that morning. He didn't see the young woman sitting on the cafe patio just across from the dock, iced coffee in one hand, phone in the other. Her name was Lena Cho, a 26-year-old marine biology grad student visiting Bayfield shores to study coastal ecosystems and, ironically, the effects of modernization on marine life. She had just finished scribbling field notes when Chad Ellison's voice cut through the air like a boat engine in still water. "We don't serve people like you." It wasn't just what he said, it was the way he said it. Sharp, public, meant to humiliate. Lena's phone was already recording before she realized what she was doing. She watched as Walter stood motionless, holding his veteran ID and a folder full of permissions. She saw the children waiting nearby with puzzled, disappointed expressions. And when Walter untied the Horizon Bell and silently sailed away, Lena just sat there, stunned, the video still playing back in her hands. She didn't know his name at first, but later that evening she asked around. It didn't take long. In a town like Bayfield, no matter how much money moves in, stories like Walter's still live on in whispers. That's Walter Briggs. Navy veteran. Teaches kids how to fish. He's been doing it for years. That night, Lena posted the video to her personal account. No filter, no editing, just raw footage of the moment Bayfield forgot who it was. She added a caption, Today, I watched a 77-year-old Navy veteran get kicked out of Port Bayfield Marina because his wooden boat wasn't aesthetic enough. His name is Walter Briggs. He spent the last 15 years taking underprivileged kids on free educational boat trips, and this is how they treated him. The video spread like a rogue tide. Within 6 hours, it had over 30,000 views. By morning, that number doubled. By the next evening, it had passed 2 million. And the comments, oh, the comments. Former students flooded the thread. Captain Briggs taught me how to tie my first fishing knot. I was 8. He gave my little brother his first life vest when we couldn't afford one. He took my dad fishing after his stroke. Didn't ask for a dime. Parents shared stories. Teachers uploaded class photos from the Horizon Bell. Veterans from around the country chimed in, some with medals in their profile pictures, some just with heavy words. But one comment stood out. It came in late that night from a verified military account. The username read Radiant Rain. The profile photo, a man in dress whites, silver stars on his shoulder boards. His comment was short. Just 6 words, location confirmed. Situation noted. Standby. The internet froze. Those who understood military ranks recognized it instantly. Rear Admiral Thomas Rain, current commander of the Navy's Atlantic Fleet 3rd Division. A high-ranking officer not known for casual social media posts. Someone replied under the comment, "Wait, are you saying what I think you're saying?" An hour later, Admiral Rain posted a second reply, this time with a photo. It was a scanned newspaper clipping from 1984. A Coast Guard helicopter, a crowd of evacuees, and in the center a young boy wrapped in a foil blanket being carried off the aircraft by a much younger sailor. Written beneath it, that was me. And the man carrying me, that was Lieutenant Commander Walter Briggs. Suddenly, the story wasn't just viral, it was personal. A national conversation erupted. Veteran forums reposted the video. Navy families shared it with captions like, "This is why we serve." Active duty service members began uploading tribute photos. Even celebrity veterans, actors, authors, anchors began calling out Bayfield shores. Local news picked it up next. Then national outlets, morning talk shows, headlines, decorated Navy veteran expelled from Marine over boat appearance. Admiral responds, "That man saved me." When honor is forgotten, the Navy remembers. Walter, meanwhile, had no idea. He spent the evening folding flags the way he always did when his heart was heavy. He didn't check his phone. He didn't know he was trending. He didn't recognize the storm building around his name. Until just after midnight, his old flip phone buzzed with a single anonymous text. "Command Master Chief Briggs, protocol dignity initiating. Please maintain position. Confirmation unnecessary." He stared at it for a moment, confused. No name, no signature, just that. He smiled faintly, chalking it up to a wrong number. Then he turned off the light and went to bed, unaware that across the ocean, in the steel corridors of ships now changing course, the Navy had already started moving. 2 mornings later, the people of Bayfield shores woke to an unfamiliar sound, the distant hum of engines rolling over the sea. At first, no one paid attention. The beach joggers kept running, latte cups in hand. The cafe owners opened their doors like usual. The tourists wandered toward the docks, expecting dolphins or maybe a sunrise sail. But then the horizon changed. One by one, 6 colossal naval ships came into view, moving in perfect formation across the silver water. Not a word had been spoken publicly. No news bulletin, no alerts. Just steel cutting through the calm like a forgotten promise returning home. Locals stopped mid-step. Tourists pulled out phones. Children pointed. Even the Marina's valet service, trained to smile through anything, stood in frozen silence. At 7:00 a.m., sharp, the ships came to a gentle halt just beyond the harbor's edge. 3 destroyers, 2 supply ships, and a sleek command vessel, the USS Sovereign, took position in a flawless arc. Their presence was undeniable, their message unspoken but clear. Inside the Marina office, Chad Ellison dropped his tablet. He stood at the window, eyes wide, watching the surreal scene unfold. "What the hell is this?" he muttered, already loosening the collar of his branded polo. Just minutes later, a small military launch detached from the command ship and made its way toward the dock, its engine quiet, its movements deliberate. It flew the American flag, and directly beneath it the personal command standard of Rear Admiral Thomas Rain. Behind the lead boat, 5 more vessels followed each, carrying uniformed sailors in gleaming white dress attire standing at full attention. By the time they reached the Marina's primary berth, the same dock where Walter Briggs had been publicly expelled, over 200 residents, tourists, and reporters had gathered in stunned silence. When the launch arrived, Admiral Rain stepped ashore with measured steps, his face unreadable beneath the brim of his white cap. His uniform was immaculate, adorned with ribbons and stars that gleamed in the rising sun. He walked to the center of the dock, flanked by officers on both sides. Then he stopped, turned to the crowd, and spoke. "I'm looking for Walter Briggs." No microphone, no amplification, and yet his voice carried across the still water and into the chest of everyone watching. No one responded at first. Then an elderly woman, Elena, the fishmonger, who had known Walter since the early days, stepped forward with trembling fingers and pointed toward the old public dock. "They kicked him out," she said. "He's down at the pier by the rocks." Admiral Rain didn't flinch. He turned to his second in command. "Chief Petty Officer Mitchell. Dispatch retrieval team. Bring Command Master Chief Briggs back with full honors." "Aye, sir." 3 black SUVs, each marked discreetly with military insignia, peeled away from the convoy, waiting near the harbor entrance. Within minutes, they disappeared down the coast road. Admiral Rain remained his gaze sweeping the growing crowd. Then he addressed them not with anger, but with solemn resolve. For those unfamiliar with maritime tradition, he began, when a sailor of distinguished service enters port, the fleet acknowledges their arrival. Today we've arrived not for ceremony or spectacle, but to acknowledge the legacy of a man this town tried to forget. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Reporters raised cameras. Chad Ellison sank farther behind the office window. Walter Briggs' reign continued lead missions through hurricanes. He saved lives, including mine. He taught children, healed communities, and asked for nothing in return. Until this, Marina decided his boat didn't match their standards. He turned to look directly at the berth where Walter had once tied his boat. That vessel, the Horizon Belle, carries more honor in its wood and rope than most men carry in their lifetimes. Behind him, nearly 100 uniformed sailors silently unfurled a massive naval ensign. It rippled across the dock in perfect form. "We are here," he finished, "because when a nation forgets its heroes, the Navy shows up to remind them." At that moment, from the far edge of the marina, the SUVs returned. Walter Briggs stepped out still in his old fishing jacket and worn cap, looking bewildered, but his spine was straight and his eyes were sharp. As he approached the dock, the entire formation of naval personnel snapped to attention. Admiral Rain faced him, then offered a crisp salute. Walter returned it, and for the first time in a long time, Bayfield Shores remembered what honor looked like. For years, Bayfield Shores had been drifting unmoored from the values it once held close. Somewhere along the way, the town swapped its fishing nets for photo filters, its soul for spa menus, and its stories for real estate slogans. But when the Navy showed up, everything changed. Not with force, not with fanfare, but with quiet, disciplined presence. The naval ships stayed anchored off the coast for 3 days. During that time, no official orders were given, yet everyone knew this was no ordinary visit. It wasn't a training drill. It was a statement. Uniformed sailors volunteered throughout the town. Some helped repaint the weathered public dock where Walter had been forced to moor his boat. Others cleared driftwood, replaced safety signs, and cleaned up debris no one had noticed before. They didn't just restore the marina, they restored dignity. In front of the Horizon Cafe, where the confrontation had first been recorded, a chalkboard sign appeared overnight: "Veterans and children eat free forever," in honor of Walter Briggs. Walter didn't ask for that. He wouldn't have. But the owner, a woman whose father had served in Korea, said it felt like the only proper response. Across Bayfield, something unexpected began to stir remorse. People who had stood by silently that day, eyes fixed on their phones pretending not to notice, started showing up at Walter's cottage with handwritten letters. Some brought food, others brought their children. Elena, the old fishmonger, cried as she hugged him. "I should have said something. I stood right there. I watched it happen." Walter, ever composed, placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Communities forget themselves sometimes," he said. "The important thing is remembering who you want to be. Even the mayor of Bayfield Shores, who had initially dismissed the naval presence as a dramatic overreaction, was called aboard the USS Sovereign. There in the Admiral's conference room, he was shown Walter's full-service record community impact letters and dozens of testimonials from families who had benefited from his boat excursions. The next morning, the mayor held an emergency town council meeting. Cameras rolled as he signed an executive order officially renaming the Marina Veterans Pier. A permanent bronze monument would be erected at Dock 12, the very dock where Walter had once been shamed, engraved with these words, "A nation is only as strong as its remembrance of those who kept its waters safe." Chad Ellison, the harbor manager who had started it all, resigned that same afternoon. He left town quietly after delivering a sealed envelope to Walter's door. Inside was a short letter, a sincere apology, and a sentence Walter never repeated out loud. Whatever it said, it was enough that Walter nodded, folded it carefully, and placed it in the same wooden box where he kept his old service medals. Meanwhile, Admiral Rain offered Walter a substantial grant funds from a Veteran Honor Initiative backed by private donors and the Navy's Community Outreach Division. But Walter declined. "Put it towards something that lasts," he said. "Start a program for kids who've never even seen the ocean." And so the Horizon Project was born. Launched with seed funding from the Navy and supported by local businesses, it became a free maritime education initiative for underserved youth across Florida. Classes in navigation, boating, safety, environmental stewardship, and most importantly, character. Walter agreed to serve as its honorary director. Active duty instructors from nearby naval stations volunteered their shore leave to teach. Within weeks, the program had waiting lists. On the final day of the fleet's presence, something remarkable happened. The same tourists who had once complained about Walter's ugly wooden boat now lined up along the dock not for selfies, but to learn how to fold an American flag properly. Children once bored by his sea stories now sat with wide eyes as young sailors explained the meaning behind maritime signals and naval ranks. And Walter, he simply went back to doing what he had always done. Waking before the sun, inspecting the flag, sailing the Horizon Belle with children on board, teaching them not just how to read the water, but how to respect it. But this time when he returned to port, people stood up. They saluted. They waited patiently to shake his hand. And they didn't just see a man in a cap and worn jacket. They saw a keeper of values, a living reminder that honor doesn't retire. It simply waits to be recognized. Walter Briggs never sought recognition. He didn't keep medals on the wall or stories in his pocket. He believed that service wasn't something you displayed, it was something you lived quietly, consistently, even after the uniform came off. And in the months following the Navy's return to Bayfield Shores, his legacy quietly took root. The Marina now bore his name, Briggs Dock, marked by a modest bronze plaque beside the mooring post where he once stood alone. But it wasn't the plaque that mattered. It was the way people had begun to treat that space. Locals walked slower as they passed. Children pointed to the flag above it and asked their parents, who was he again? And the parents knew, because now everyone knew. Every Wednesday, the Horizon Belle set sail again, not from the back dock behind the fuel station, but from Slip 1, the Marina's most prominent berth offered to Walter by unanimous town vote. The kids were still the same, wide-eyed, nervous, full of questions. And Walter was still Walter. His boots scuffed his hands, calloused, his voice steady, as he explained how to tie a cleat hitch or read a compass. Only now the town didn't ignore him. Now it listened. But it wasn't just Walter who was seen differently. The wave of awareness that followed his story reached others too. A Korean War medic living in isolation was invited to speak at the local school. A Vietnam veteran who hadn't worn his uniform in 30 years was asked to help lead the Memorial Day ceremony. The community had rediscovered something it didn't even know it had lost the power of remembrance. As for Admiral Thomas Rain, he kept his promise. He visited often, usually unannounced, sometimes just to sit on the porch with Walter in the cool twilight hours. They rarely spoke about the headlines or the monument. Instead, they shared sea stories, compared notes on old ships, sat in companionable silence watching the tide roll in, like two sailors waiting out a long watch. One evening, as the stars began to appear above the bay, Walter looked out over the water and said quietly, "I never wanted all this attention, Tom. I just wanted the kids to know how to respect the ocean." Admiral Rain nodded. "The best leaders never want the spotlight, Walter. That's why it has to find them. Some thank yous come late, but they still need to come. Walter didn't reply. He just nodded slowly, his eyes reflecting the quiet pride of a man who had spent a lifetime doing the right thing when no one was watching. And maybe that was the legacy all along. Not the ceremony, not the ships, but the reminder. That honor isn't a moment, it's a pattern. That sometimes one wooden boat, one stubborn, soft-spoken man, can steer a whole town back to its compass. In a world moving faster than ever, where likes matter more than legacies, an image often outweighs integrity, it's easy to forget the quiet heroes among us. But this story reminds us of something deeply American: respect isn't seasonal, and honor doesn't expire. Walter Briggs never asked to be noticed. He served, he taught, and he kept showing up. And yet when his dignity was stripped away by silence and pride, something incredible happened. The very institution he once served stood up to say, "We remember you. We still stand for you." Maybe we all know someone like Walter. A neighbor who always mows the lawns on the block without being asked. A retired teacher who still volunteers at the library. A veteran who never talks about what they saw, but stands when the anthem plays. Let this story be a reminder: sometimes the simplest acts, teaching a child, folding a flag, helping without a headline, are the ones that shape generations. So here's what I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed someone being quietly heroic in your life? Or do you believe America still honors those who served even after the applause fades? Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every one of them. Let's talk about it. Let's remember. Let's be better. Thank you for watching this story. If it touched your heart, please take a second to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that dignity still matters and that the tide can always turn. Because sometimes it only takes one boat to guide a whole town back home.